Well, Opera Folk, I am back with you for a bonus presentation. I'm back. You can't get rid of me. After my customary four main stage productions, Virginia Opera is going back into the Broadway musical business. Now, some of you veteran opera goers may remember in the old days productions of West Side Story and Don Quixote at Virginia Opera. And those went by the boards for a while, but our president and CEO, Russell Allen, has now entered into a partnership with the Virginia Arts Festival, and we are back on Broadway. Bright lights, big city. And we're, of course, premiering our new production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, a seminal work in the history of music theater, and one of the works that really earned Richard Rodgers his towering reputation in the annals of American music. So we're going to put Carousel under the microscope today, kind of see what makes it tick, maybe give you some slants on it or little points of view on it that maybe you hadn't considered, even if you have been in this show or seen it or seen the movie. Some of you may have seen the recent PBS telecast from Lincoln Center with a concert version. We'll take a look at it today, and just to intrigue you a little bit, here are some of the people and places we'll be referencing today in talking about Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel. These would include Giacomo Puccini and an opera he almost wrote, the city of Budapest, Hungary, the English music hall tradition, some guy named Andreas Savocky, Chris Brown and Rihanna, right from the gossip pages, the tabloids. Verdi's Falstaff, which of course is the season opening production for the coming year at Virginia Opera. And also the soccer team in Liverpool, known as the Liverpool Football Club. What on earth could that have to do with a Broadway musical? Well, stay tuned. We're going to get into all of that during the next several minutes. Of course, many feel that Carousel may be the greatest American musical. Time magazine gave it that designation, and many critics have joined the chorus of praise for it. It has universal themes of love and redemption. It has a certain gravitas, coming to grips as it does with an important societal issue of domestic violence. It has that feature of Billy, the tough guy carnival barker, coming back to Earth after his death to see what he might have made of his life, to look for redemption, to see how the world is getting along without him. And that made me think, this musical came out in 1945, and the following year we had the classic Frank Capra film, It's a Wonderful Life, which has a kind of a similar phenomenon, a dramatic device of a fella coming back to Earth to look at what the world would have been like if he never existed, in that case, with the Jimmy Stewart character, George Bailey. And I was wondering if both of those related themes might have had something to do with World War II, with people being afraid that soldiers might not be returning, and wondering how life would be if they never came back, that sort of thing. I think that might bring to bear, be one of the ways in which the Great War, the Great Second World War, kind of affected Americans, the way they looked at life back at home. Anyway, it occurs to me that music theater in America has followed two different tracks, two different kind of parallel schools of operation. There is the jazz-based musical that really kind of emphasizes tap dancing when dancing is an element. But then there's also the opera or operetta-based school, in which when there's dancing, the tap shoes were replaced with ballet slippers, and it becomes a bit more serious and ambitious. The first musicals were really derived from minstrel shows and later vaudeville, and you had jazzy, popular songs that were kind of loosely stitched together with dancing and jokes and skits. And when, in time, these skits became enlarged to become actual storylines with named characters, then you had the genre of the Broadway musical that we know finally established. Now, with his two collaborators, Lawrence Hart and then later Oscar Hammerstein, Richard Rodgers had lengthy careers in both of those styles and was really a leading figure in the switch to a more operatic style. Now, when Lawrence Hart kind of fell victim to alcoholism and was no longer able to collaborate with Rodgers, he turned to find a new partner in Hammerstein. This was in the early 1940s. I believe that Richard Rodgers made a deliberate and conscious decision to write a more ambitious style of dramatic work. The first of those was Oklahoma in 1943 and then Carousel in 1945. Now, the best way to understand what I'm talking about, let's play side by side two excerpts from representative shows from each style. And I think it'll kind of speak for itself. First, from a show that I think has a wonderful score, The Boys from Syracuse. Here's a number that is called This Can't Be Love.
Oh, half-wit. This can't be love because I feel so well. No sobs, no sorrows, no sighs. This can't be love, I get no dizzy spell. My head is not in the skies. My heart does not stand still, just hear it beat. This is too sweet to be love. This can't be love because I feel so well, but still I love to look in your eyes.
All right, now you're not going to cast an opera singer in that role. I think we can agree. The thing about Carousel is opera singers sing this material all the time. Witness that PBS Lincoln Center telecast. In fact, here to sing the famous tune from Carousel, we'll hear a portion of If I Loved You, a number we'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. Here is, of all folks, Renata Tebaldi. A little bit of fairly unintelligible English diction and some fairly schlocky orchestration a la Hollywood aside, I think you can hear the distinction between the two styles. Enough said. Now, you may not know Carousel is based on a 1909 play by one Ferenc Molnár called Lilium. This was set in Budapest, Hungary, and it tells the same story that we know from Carousel about a tough guy carnival barker. In this case, his name is Andreas Savocky, and his violent and doomed marriage to Julie. And in this play, in Lilium, she's named Julie Zeller. And by the way, did you know that none other than Giacomo Puccini approached Ferenc Molnár about obtaining the rights to this play for the purpose of adapting it for the opera stage? Molnár rejected Puccini's proposal. He was afraid that his work would be swamped by the world-famous composer and he would kind of lose his prestige. But later he did approve Rodgers and Hammerstein because he really admired Oklahoma very much and the way that they had adapted the play on which that was based. Now, after briefly considering setting the musical in Louisiana with kind of a Creole flavor and patois, which sort of blows my mind. That's really a little hard to imagine. Rogers actually got the idea to switch the action to New England in a coastal Maine fishing community. Now, Rogers and Hammerstein had worked with the choreographer Agnes DeMille in Oklahoma because she incorporated a ballet into that work, which was revolutionary at the time, really cutting edge. Again, no tap dancing. And she returned to make two big contributions to Carousel. Now, besides the formal ballet in the second act, when we see Billy observing his daughter Louise as a young woman, Agnes DeMille was also asked to stage the famous Carousel Waltz, which Rogers composed as an alternative to a traditional Broadway overture. You know, these days it's kind of customary. You may have seen at Virginia Opera quite often these days, overtures to operas are staged with pantomime. This was, again, a fairly revolutionary idea. In order to give a little more gravitas to this production, you see, a traditional Broadway overture is nothing more than a medley of show tunes. And audiences really didn't pay much attention to them anymore, between talking and looking through the program books and unwrapping candy wrappers and so forth. So Rogers wanted the orchestral opening to be a part of the drama, and it contains no tunes from the songs to follow. It's just original music, a fantastic, atmospheric, passionate waltz that reminds me of some of the great waltzes from the classical repertoire. It is so intense. And here's an example of what I mean. Let's listen to a short excerpt from Maurice Ravel's orchestral work, the Valse Noble Sentimentale. Just listen to the ecstatic abandon in this excerpt. Alrighty, with the big climaxes. Now compare that with a couple of minutes out of the Carousel Waltz. I don't rule out the possibility that Richard Rogers was pretty familiar with Ravel and some of the dramatic Strauss waltzes. Here's a little bit of this classic. Alrighty, now on to the drama itself and the first scene, where we get standard character exposition, and we're going to meet the prima donna, Julie Jordan, and her best friend, I guess we could say seconda donna, Carrie. Now, again, I think of Puccini again. You know, in La Boheme, you have two couples. You have Marcello and Musetta, and then you have the primary focus of the opera, Rodolfo and Mimi. Rodolfo and Mimi are the heavy, emotional, tragic couple, and Marcello and Musetta are the kind of conventional, ordinary couple that have their spats but really love each other and are probably going to go on and have a long, happy life together. I think there's a parallel for that with Mr. Snow and Carrie and Billy Bigelow and Julie Jordan. Julie and Billy are the troubled, restless, unhappy couple, and Carrie and Mr. Snow, or Enoch Snow, are the very conventional, somewhat more shallow, happy couple. And there are clues to this in Carrie's first solo. Just again for character exposition, Carrie is going to tell us about Julie in a little solo called You're a Queer One, Julie Jordan. Now, as you listen to this, notice something about the rhythm of the vocal lines. Carrie expresses herself in straight eighth notes. Ba 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 ba. Whereas when Julie responds, it's in an uneven kind of dotted rhythm. Da 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 da. This is significant. There is a distinction between the two characters. Julie is not like Carrie, and maybe that dotted rhythm gives her a little bit of an offhand, diffident, careless, unengaged sound because she's not really engaged by all of the typical things in New England life that bring other people pleasure, the clam bakes that we'll hear about later, and so forth. She's looking for something she doesn't know what.
Queer one, Julie Jordan. You are quieter and deeper than a well, and you never tell me nothing. There's nothing that I care to choose to tell. You've been acting most peculiar. Every morning you're awake ahead of me, always sitting by the window. I like to watch the river meet the sea.
And then Carrie gets her first real solo. Let's not call it an aria. It's a nice Broadway tune, Mr. Snow, in which she describes the guy she's going to settle down with and that she's already got her sights on in terms of marital future. Again, it establishes Carrie as a conventional, typical young girl who is easily satisfied with ordinary life, unlike Julie. The music is pleasant, but not passionate. It's entertaining. It's a little bit shallow emotionally. And that made me think. I'll tell you what I was starting to wonder about this tune. But first, let's hear it, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
When I marry Mr. Snow, the flowers'll be buzzing with the hum of bees. The birds'll make a racket in the churchyard trees. When I marry Mr. Snow, then it's off to home we'll go. And both of us will look a little dreamy-eyed, a-driving to a cottage by the ocean side, where the salty breezes blow.
What do we make of this song? Is it likely to be anybody's favorite? Well, if you love Richard Rodgers, you love that type of tune. That sounds like Rodgers and Hammerstein as nothing else, but not so much the operatic Rodgers and Hammerstein. There's nothing operatic about it, but then again, it's not very jazzy either. It's not vocal jazz like we heard from the boys from Syracuse. What is it? It's a little hokey. It's a little corny. It's awfully wholesome. That's why my friend Jeff Corvo, one of the leading figures in Tidewater theater scene, really hates Rodgers and Hammerstein. He doesn't like the hokey. It's all right with me, but where does it come from? What is the genesis of this style? And you know, the other day it hit me. It's the tradition of English music hall entertainment. Like Mr. Snow and other numbers, the English music hall songs were entertaining, charming, tuneful, catchy, a little bland, highly singable, just a little shallow, pleasant entertainment. Listen to, I found this on the internet the other day. Here's Margaret Lockwood singing a song called Liza in an English music hall performance from just about the time of Carousel in the 1940s.
Liza, you are my donor. You are my little peach. Meet me round at the fish shop, and I will buy you a penny of each love. Love ya, no bloke dare come and kiss ya. Oh, for him I shall go.
Yeah, do you hear the similarity? That's the type of tune you can sing along with, and those English music hall audiences did sing along when she repeated that chorus. And it's in this type of Rodgers and Hammerstein tune that we might want to sing along. Nobody sings along with Billy's soliloquy, as we'll hear a little bit later. It's a little hard vocally. And, you know, when we meet Mr. Snow later on, and he is with Carrie and talking about their future life together, he sings in exactly the same style. Pleasant, catchy, entertaining, emotions that aren't especially intense or deep. English music hall.
When the children are asleep, we'll sit and dream the things that every other dad and mother dream. When the children are asleep and lights are low, if I still love you the way I love you today, you'll pardon my saying I told you so. When the children are asleep, I'll dream with you.
Well, now let's return to that most iconic moment from this musical, the great scene of If I Loved You. It's a great number. It is operatic, as we heard an opera singer singing it, and it didn't sound out of place other than her Italian accent. So what do we call this? Is it a duet for Julie and Billy? Well, you know, they actually never sing at the same time during this number. Is it an aria? Do they each sing an aria? Well, yes, but it's a little more than that. When you take a look at the entire scene in which If I Loved You occurs, I see Richard Rodgers learning from operatic masters of the past like Verdi. This is what the operatic term that we would use for this scene is a scena, the Italian word for scene. And I'm going to read to you now from the New Grove Dictionary of Opera what the definition of a scena is. A scena, a 19th century term for a dramatic episode, a complex of recitative, either conversational, declamatory, and arioso, meaning a short snatch of melodic recitative, plus orchestral figuration, and parlante, a speaking quality, preparatory to a formal number, as in scena ed aria or scena e duetto. If I Loved You is a scena e duetto, even though Julie and Billy never sing at the same time. Now, rather than just play this pretty song for you, let's kind of take a look at the whole scene and break it down into its components and see where they match that definition I just read. Well, first of all, there are some bits of spoken dialogue, and Billy is going to do a reprise of Carrie's You're a Queer One number, which is a bit of arioso, and Julie is going to respond with some accompanied recitative, some new musical material we haven't heard before, in which she talks about whether she would give Billy any money.
Say, tell me something. Ain't you scared of me?
I ain't scared.
That your name? Julie? Julie something?
Julie Jordan.
You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. Ain't you sorry that you didn't run away? You can still go if you wanna.
I reckon that like here to choose to stay. You couldn't take my money if I didn't have any, and I don't have a penny, that's true. But if I did have money, you couldn't take any, 'cause you'd ask and I'd give it to you.
You're a queer one, Julie Jordan. Ain't you ever had a...
Now, when she sang that, if I didn't have money, da-da-dum, that was the little bit of arioso portion of that recitative. Well, as you heard, they're going to repeat that exchange of you're a queer one and recitative, and Billy asks Julie whether she's ever had a boyfriend, and she says she's never going to marry. And then in another stretch of dialogue, Billy offhandedly wonders how she'd feel if he married her, and now they begin this process of beating around the bush, both afraid to express themselves. Julie introduces yet another short arioso, the final step before the main aria of If I Loved You. Let's hear that portion.
Suppose I was to say to you that I'd marry you.
You?
Oh, that scares you, don't it? You're thinking of what that cop said.
No, I ain't. I don't pay no mind to what he said.
But you wouldn't marry anyone like me, would you?
Oh, yes, I would. If I loved you, it wouldn't make any difference what you... Even if I died for it.
How do you know what you'd do if you loved me? Or how you'd feel or anything?
I don't know how I know. Just the same, I know how it'd be if I loved you. When I worked in the mill, weaving at the loom, I'd gaze absent-minded at the roof, and half the time the shuttle would tangle in the thread, and the warp would get mixed with the wool.
All righty. Now, imagining what it would be like if she was with him sort of brings out her romantic instincts, and now she finds the courage to say she loves him without saying she loves him in that tune that we all know, the aria portion of this Shana, If I Loved You.
But somehow I can see just exactly how I'd be if I loved you. Time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know. If I loved you, words wouldn't come in an easy way. Round in circles I'd go, longing to tell you, but afraid and shy. I'd let my golden chances pass me by. Soon you'd leave me. Off you would...
Oh, Julie, you took a breath before Pass Me By. You broke up the phrase. Well, it's not really opera. I guess we can let you get away with that. And I know you want me to stop talking and just play the pretty music, but too bad. You'll hear it when you come to the Harrison Opera House. That's when you're going to hear the whole number. Now, we're not done. We're still in the middle of our Shana. And after a bit more dialogue, Billy is going to repeat both of those ariosos, those recitative ariosos that Julie had. He's getting in a romantic mood now. He's going to describe the beauty of this quiet summer evening in this one.
A sound, not the turn of a leaf, nor the fall of a wave hitting the sand. The tide's creeping up on the beach like a thief, afraid to be caught stealing the land. On a night like this I start to wonder what life is all about.
And I always say two heads are better than one, to figure it out.
I don't need you or anyone to help me. I got it figured out for myself. We ain't important. What are we? A couple of specks of nothing. Look up there. There's a hell of a lot of stars.
And then, right at the tail end of that excerpt, what did Billy do after some intervening dialogue? He launched into the second arioso that Julie had introduced earlier. This material keeps changing, and yet it recurs with symmetry for each character. And of course, this leads into Billy's restatement of the great sweeping melody of the aria. Here it is, sung by John Raitt, the fellow who created the role of Billy.
If I loved you, time and again I would try to say all I'd want you to know. If I loved you, words wouldn't come in an easy way.
And that leads to some kissing and smooching while the orchestra swells up one more time with the theme and curtain, Shana. Operatic technique applied to an American version of what opera became, really, in these more serious and ambitious musical comedies by Rodgers and Hammerstein. Two more things about If I Loved You. I talked about the operatic sweep of the melody. It occurred to me, this is the way my mind works. You know those first three notes? If I loved you. It occurred to me that those three notes remind me of a vocal line from Verdi's Aida in the scene between Amonasro and Aida. Now, as we play this next track, listen to the first three notes sung by the baritone. Okay, I'm not saying that Verdi's estate could sue the Rodgers and Hammerstein estate for plagiarism. However, you also may have noticed it was in exactly the same key, because it's a good key for a baritone. And another thing about If I Loved You, when you stop and think about a lot of the American musical comedies from the mid-20th century, oftentimes the love songs are what I might call the conditional love songs, in which the characters are kind of non-committal and either too shy or otherwise reluctant to say those famous three little words, I love you. Actually, we opened the show today with one of those. This can't be love, sings the character in Boys from Syracuse. He's in love, but he says, oh, this can't be love, kind of negative. From Oklahoma, people will say we're in love. Curly's not going to say it, but other people will. From Showboat, Jerome Kern, perhaps the first of the operatic American musicals, we could make believe I love you. And from Brigadoon of Lerner and Loewe, we have It's Almost Like Being in Love. What a rare mood I'm in. Why, it's almost like being in love. Again, I wonder if the uncertainty of life during a time of World War made people a little bit reluctant to commit to a relationship because they didn't know if it would last. Well, we need to move along to the crowning centerpiece of this show, which is Billy's soliloquy. Of course, he marries Julie, and Julie, they discover, is expecting a child. And we have a lengthy, almost about a 7-minute musical number for Billy in which he reflects on how fatherhood might change his life. Now, it is not a song. It's not an aria. It's really too long and musically diffuse to be called just a song. It is just as the title states, it is a soliloquy or a monologue. And here again, I see the influence of Verdi, who composed several great baritone soliloquies, monologues, which were not really standard arias. Of course, this would include Rigoletto's famous Pari Siamo. But the example I want to play for you, just to give you some context for what you're going to hear from Billy, is one from Virginia Opera's opening production of next season. This is also a little plug, a little PR. Got to sell those tickets. Ford's Dream monologue from Falstaff, E sogno o realtà. Ford is horror-struck to discover that apparently his lovely wife Alice has entered into an assignation, a tryst with some lover. And he's wondering how he could have possibly trusted her. Now, all the traits that separate a monologue from an aria are here in this little excerpt. The form of the music is dictated by the train of thought of the words. Rather than locked into a musical form, such as a verse and chorus, or a three-part ABA form with a returning melody, the musical material constantly evolves, introducing new ideas to suit the new thought. Here's a little bit of Ford's monologue from Falstaff.
L'ora è fissata, trovato l'inganno, sei gabbato e truffato, e poi diranno che un marito geloso è un insensato. Già dietro a me nomi d'infame con io fischian passando, mormora lo scherno. Oh, matrimonio infame, donna, demonio, nella lor moglie abbiam fede i babbei. Affiderei la mia birra a un tedesco, tutto il mio desco a un olandese l'urco. La mia bottiglia d'acqua vite a un turco, no, mia moglie a se stessa. Olai da sorte, quella brutta parola in cor mi torna, e corna, ue capron le usa forte, ah, le corna, le corna.
Now, if I asked you to sing the melody that you just heard, you wouldn't know how to respond. There wasn't a particular theme that sticks out. It was just dramatic, rhetorical singing all the way through with constantly changing musical material. Now let's compare with Billy's soliloquy. And by the way, you'll notice the sound quality is not quite up to modern stereo standards here, because I went back to a 1952 recording by John Raitt. We've been listening to the cast album from the 1965 revival when John Raitt, still in pretty good voice, came back to the role of Billy 20 years after creating it. But let's hear one a little bit closer when he was in amazing vocal estate. This singer, he's one of those that designations like baritone or tenor mean nothing. He sort of has a baritonal quality, but the range of a tenor, as you'll hear. And so here he is in one big section of the earlier part of the soliloquy, in which he's imagining the son that he was going to name after himself and what that son will be like, but evolves with new introduction of musical material into a horrifying thought. Oh my gosh, it might be a girl.
I don't give a darn what he does, as long as he does what he likes. He can sit in a jail or work on a rail with a hammer and spikes. He can bury carry a boat on the river, or carry a pack on his back, or work up and down the street of a town with a whip and a horse and a hack. He can haul a scow along a canal, run a cow around a corral, or maybe bark for a carousel. Of course, it takes talent to do that well. He might be the champ of the heavyweights, or a fellow that sells you glue, or president of the United States. That'd be all right, too. Yes, Mother would like that. But he wouldn't be president unless he wanted to be, not Bill. My boy Bill, he'll be tall and as tough as a tree. Well, Bill, like a tree, he'll grow with his head held high and his feet planted firm on the ground. And you won't see nobody dare to try to boss him or toss him around. No flat-footed, flabby-faced, pot-bellied, baggy-eyed bully'll boss him around. And I'm darned if he'll marry his boss's daughter, a skinny-lipped woman with blood like water, who give him a peck and call it a kiss and look in his eyes through a lorgnette. Say, why am I taking on like this? My kid ain't even been born yet. I can see him when he's 17 or so, and starting to go with a girl. I can give him lots of pointers, very sound, on the way to get round any girl. I can tell him. Wait a minute. Could it be? What if he is a girl? Bill! Oh, Bill.
Aw, Bill. Well, this soliloquy is going to turn extremely operatic towards the end. There's going to be a sort of a lullaby arioso as part of this lengthy monologue in which Billy warms to the idea of a cute little girl that he can, provide for. And then that gets him worried about providing for her. He's a bum with no money. And this leads to a type of vocalism that is very akin to what we heard from the baritone Rolando Panerai a couple of moments ago in the Verdi excerpt. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons I wanted to play this recording for you, something that he did not do in performance in a complete, when he was doing the role of Billy, but he did in this concert version. Listen to John Raitt absolutely nail a high B flat to end Billy Bigelow's soliloquy.
She has a few pink and white young fellers of 2 and 3, but my little girl gets hungry every night, and she comes home to me. My little girl, I gotta get ready before she comes. I gotta make certain that she won't be dragged up in slums with a lot of bums like me. She's gotta be sheltered and fed and dressed in the best that money can buy. I never knew how to get money, but I'll try. By God, I'll try. I'll go out and make it, or steal it, or take it, or die.
A tour de force for any baritone, and a great achievement by a great composer. Well, we heard in the opening scene how a little bit of a dotted rhythm, yum, ba-bum, 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 helped to kind of separate Julie Jordan's character from that of her more straightforward, conventional friend, Carrie, who had very straightforward, even rhythms. This is going to come back in Julie's other solo to extremely effective dramatic use. The rhythm is part of what makes this a great song, and I refer to What's the Use of Wonderin'. In Act 2, there's going to be a clam bake in which the entire village is going to come out and have a good time. Billy reluctantly agrees to go along, and really his only motivation is because he plans with his friend Jigger to do a little bit of stealing from a citizen to get some money to help pay for the expenses of fatherhood. And it all goes wrong. And Julie knows that the relationship is doomed. She's trapped in this relationship. She can't leave him because she loves him, but she knows that he's always going to disappoint her. And in the face of all of the other females of the community who have happy, normal relationships, she's left to make kind of a weak-handed defense of her own unhappy relationship. I think that there is a kind of tragic, passive pessimism about life. I think Julie is rather fatalistic in her view about life, that happiness is not for her. And this is going to open up one of the topics that we have to confront in this musical, a dark element, spousal abuse and domestic violence. But listen to the sadness that this uneven rhythm gives this great song, What's the Use of Wonderin'?
What's the use of wondering if he's good or if he's bad, or if you like the way he wears his hat? Oh, what's the use of wondering if he's good or if he's bad? He's your feller and you love him. That's all there is to that. Common sense may tell you that the ending will be sad, and now's the time to break and run away. But what's the use of wondering if the ending will be sad? He's your feller and you love him. There's nothing more to say.
Well, now, in terms of plot devices, we've gone way beyond the trivial, minimal plots of earlier musicals from the 1920s and 30s. Boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. Here, again, we're dealing with problems of society that we've always had and that we still have. South Pacific, of course, addressed the problem of racism, and here we have the problem of domestic violence. When Billy kills himself in the face of the failed robbery, and Julie finds him and kneels over his dead body, she says this to him: "I know why you hit me. You were quick-tempered and unhappy. I always knew everything you were thinking." And later in Act 2, when Billy visits Earth to reunite with the daughter that he never knew and speak to her and appear to her in visible form, and he ends up losing his temper and striking her. Louise runs away. She finds her mother and she says, "There was a strange man here and he hit me hard, but it didn't hurt at all. It was just as if he kissed me. Is it possible for someone to hit you hard like that, real loud and hard, and not hurt you at all?" And Julie answers, "It's possible, dear, for someone to hit you and not hurt at all." Well, we have to think about this, don't we? I think if you have 50 people who come to see Carousel, and the topic of this scene and this dialogue is brought up, I imagine we're going to have 50 different reactions. Some people are going to say that this is a tragic weakness in Julie's character, that she should have left him long ago. She should have not put up with it. It makes us think of, if you read the tabloids, I don't, but I did a little research for this broadcast today. We have the rock singers, or the pop singers Rihanna and Chris Brown, and their just sketchy relationship over the years, with terrible incidents of abuse and reuniting and disapproval from the public and so forth. It's something that remains with us. And I noticed that in the recent telecast that I mentioned earlier from PBS, Live from Lincoln Center, interestingly, a line of dialogue was added that is not in the original book. When Julie tells her daughter Louise that it's possible for someone to hit you and not hurt at all, in this version, Julie goes on to say, but that doesn't make it right. Is this just a question of the fact that our attitude towards domestic violence has evolved in the intervening decades, that we now don't excuse it as perhaps was done earlier? Or maybe not. Perhaps we just have to remember that all art, and this is one of the things I harp on with opera and with art in general, art is a mirror of the times. There's no use condescending to Rodgers and Hammerstein and saying, well, they should have made a stronger statement about what Julie should have done. Perhaps they were just letting their musical function as a mirror of attitudes of the time, which did have some evolution to make as mass media and television talk shows and journalism brought this problem more and more into the sunlight and out of the shadows of shame and secrecy. And perhaps we're also just intended to see Julie as a flawed character. Maybe it's a flaw. She's not a perfect person. She's not a storybook heroine. She has her weaknesses and dark areas as well. In any case, it really does bring so many levels of seriousness and high-minded purpose, I think, to this drama. It's about something. It's not just a collection of songs. And I guess this is brought into great relief with the fact that one of the standard numbers sounds for anything like kind of a secular hymn, a very spiritual number that closes the show, and that is the great aria for Nettie Fowler, which is always cast with an opera singer. The first one we're going to hear was Christine Johnson, who sang Wagner and Puccini and Verdi, and is now singing Richard Rodgers. And here comes your soccer reference. This number, You'll Never Walk Alone, was recorded in a cover version by the band Jerry and the Pacemakers. They had a #1 hit in Great Britain with You'll Never Walk Alone. And it became so popular that it was sung before all Liverpool Football Club matches. And even after the song was no longer #1 on the charts, it became a tradition. And as far as I know, to this day, before Liverpool soccer matches, the crowd lustily sings this number. Now, again, before we hear it, let's do something else. Let's close the broadcast with one more example of the difference between Rodgers and Hart and the American musical jazz tradition, Rodgers and Hammerstein and the American musical operetta tradition. Let's go back to the boys from Syracuse, and let's hear the way Richard Rodgers used to compose for alto voices, for the lower female voice. Here's a little song called O Diogenes.
Oh, Diogenes, find a man who's honest. Oh, Diogenes, wrap him up for me. Oh, Diogenes, find a man who's solid. Hook that fish if he's in the sea. Hunt him, trail him, catch him, nail him.
Now, just 7 years later, here's how Richard Rodgers composes for the lower female voice in a truly glorious and fully operatic closing number.
Walk on through the
And one of the things I admire about that number is the restraint Rogers shows in the ending, letting it end quietly and not going for the big Hollywood high note ending to lend it an even more spiritual quality. I said it was the closing number because it does return at the very end at Louise's high school graduation, where the entire company, all of the students, the villagers, and yes, the spirit of Billy Bigelow are there to let Louise know that she will truly never be alone as she goes through the rest of her life. And we understand that's because the spirit of her father will be there alongside her. And there it does function like a closing number with a big, not Hollywood, but Broadway ending. So I hope that I've whetted your appetite. I will be giving pre-curtain lectures prior to all performances of Carousel. Please make a point of coming out and seeing this fine production with some wonderful voices recreating and bringing these roles to life. Look forward to seeing you there. Come up and say hello. We'll see you at the opera.